The following is a presentation of Unidentified Entertainment and 22nd Century Radio, Manassas, Fairfax, Washington, D.C.
Hello again, Time and Space Radio Show. My name is Mike Smith and I'm your host, and we're working our way through some interesting space stories. This week we started with Stephen Hawking, and we have moved from some of his thoughts into some stories from last week, sort of doing them out of order, I suppose, but the first one, of course, the Russians looking to go to Mars as well as exploring for water on the moon. Now, a day or two earlier, it was U.S. President Donald Trump who had done some announcing of his own. Very interesting stuff from CNBC. This is Christina Wilkie covering the story. There were obviously many stories on this. President Donald Trump on Tuesday, and by the way, again, let's hit that political point again. I really would not care one way or the other. I don't think anybody on the show would care, and you shouldn't care who's president. Okay? This is just literally a roll of the dice that it's Trump. It would not matter who it was. If we could just not use a name and it would still apply. Okay? Let's be really clear about that. From CNBC, Christina Wilkie, Trump floats the idea of creating a space force to fight wars in space. President Donald Trump on Tuesday said his new national security strategy recognizes that space is a theater of war, and he floated the idea of creating a space force, a branch of the military that would operate outside of Earth's atmosphere. Quote, "Space is a war-fighting domain just like the land, air, and sea," Trump told an audience of service members at the Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. "We may even have a Space Force. Develop another one, Space Force. We have the Air Force. We'll have the Space Force." End quote. The president described how he'd originally coined the term as a joke while discussing U.S. government spending and private investment in space. "I said," this is the president speaking, "I said, maybe we need a new force. We'll call it the Space Force. And I was not really serious. Then I said, what a great idea. Maybe we'll have to do that," Trump told the crowd of Marines. "So think of that. Space Force," Trump continued, "because we're spending a lot and we have a lot of private money coming in, tremendous. You saw what happened the other day, and tremendous success. From the very beginning, many of our astronauts have been soldiers and airmen, Coast Guard men, Marines. Our service members will be vital to ensuring America continues to lead the way into the stars." It was unclear whether the president was still joking by the time he finished his off-script remarks about a space force. The White House did not respond to a request for comment. But Trump is not the only political leader in Washington who is mulling the idea of a space force. In June of 2017, a contingent of House lawmakers proposed dividing the Air Force into two separate branches, one dedicated to aviation and a second new branch dedicated to space ventures. You know, we weren't doing the show. This is Mike Smith again, not reading from CNBC. We'll get back to that in just a moment. We weren't doing the show in 2017. We had taken a couple of years off, as we covered already. And, you know, this is definitely the kind of story that we would have pounced on it then. And so, you know, if you are so inclined to do your own homework and research on this, feel free to go back to 2017, June of 2017, it says here, and see, you know, what was in the news at the moment about the announcement of something like that. I mean, it's not so far-fetched that it's not only being discussed. I mean, this is from just a few days ago, and I understand that, you know, the president's the one that brought it up, but clearly he's not out on his own when it comes to this topic. Back to the article, back to the CNBC article. Trump is not the only political leader, one dedicated to aviation. Sorry about that. Language to create a new military branch called the Space Corps did not make it into the final National Defense Authorization Bill in November, but there were several new directives included in the legislation that could facilitate the Space Corps plan in the future. Representative Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, the biggest backer in Congress of a military space branch, said these directives represent progress. This is quoting Rogers. "This is just the first step. We will not allow the United States national security space enterprise to continue to drift toward a space Pearl Harbor." End quote. And I'll stop from the CNBC article. So you can make what you want from all of those statements. Okay. Putin being what it is with missions to Mars and everything, let's drill down just a little bit into the Space Force thing, because we can, again, you can draw your own conclusions from all of that stuff. But if you've been following this topic for a long time, this would have definitely thrown up a red flag. Now, this is going to be a little loosely strung together. It's only so circumstantial, but we need to go back even a couple more years. In fact, if you go into the archive of the Time and Space radio show, even though the episode itself is more goofing around, screwing around, talking to people on the phone, and not really getting into the substance, as I'm attempting to do with this run of the show, the way it was originally supposed to have been broadcast and put together. There's other issues that we've covered. There's other topics that we've covered. One of those was an episode on Gary McKinnon, a guy named Gary McKinnon, a British hacker, sometimes referred to as the NASA hacker. I would like to discuss McKinnon and some other information in the next segment. And for those of you who are not familiar with this material, I will say this. The connection here is a little spooky as far as I'm concerned. The fact that we had already covered this so many years ago is also spooky. The information may be not directly connected. I think we're working on some parallel levels here, and we'll have to get into it a little bit further in the next segment. But just think for a moment. We talked about Hawking, an alien race, maybe extraterrestrial race of some type floating around in massive ships. Now you've got the U.S. talking about some sort of a space force, which is a little bit different than the way that people, I think, have talked about the military and space so far. So let's double back to a couple of older stories and try to apply some additional context. All right. Hashtag Tiangong Down on Twitter. Hashtag Russia18Pics at Time and Space US. We're going to take another quick break. Stick with us this week. We got a couple other stories I think you'll find interesting to follow up.
"22nd Century Radio"